Here tonight to talk about North Square. We're going to do a reconstruction over there, really in the preliminary design. Before we get started, I'd like to ask if there's anybody from the press here tonight. I know we have Matt Conti in the back for North End Waterfront. He'll be recording the meeting. Is there anybody else? And you're with? Okay. How about any elected officials or their representatives? Okay. So I guess we'll get started. Like I said, Joe Fleury, I'll be the project manager for the city on this. This is Randy Collins with Beta Group, our design consultant, and also have Will McGrath with Beta. I'll hand it over to Randy. When we're done with the presentation, we'll answer questions. Thank you.
So we're just going to turn the lights down so it's a little easier to see. We'll leave some on in the back. Again, my name is Randy Collins with Beta Group, and this is the first public meeting for the North Square project. We started about a few months ago looking at getting underway with the project and understanding the project. And this meeting is really one of the most integral parts of being able to understand North Square, how the residents use it, people who visit it use it. And so this meeting is meant to present two things. First is our preliminary understanding of the square. Second, our sort of approach to the design. And then what we hope to do is have you tell us a lot more about the square, that things that you feel we need to know, so that as we do move into the design phase, that we can take that into account. And then the next time you see us, we'll be looking at some preliminary plans. So, the project area, I'm sure all of you know, is the Rose Kennedy Greenway. North Square is sort of in the middle of the North End area. And it is something that is very loved by a lot of people and has a lot of visitors. Purposes or opportunities to recognize North Square as one of Boston's oldest neighborhoods. It was one of the founding locations. Reinforce a significant place in history. We want to make sure that that's being appreciated as we move the design approach forward. Provide an open space that accommodates multiple users is a very important goal. Improve accessibility. I'm sure many of you know it's a difficult area to get around in, even for the able-bodied. I'm trying to find opportunities for art. This is the plan that we would be working from. Again, the project area is this zone here, like that. One of the things that are important to point out is some of the different circulation and historic elements. So from a historic element, we have the Paul Revere House, we have the Pierce Hitchborn House here, we have the Marinette House, and we have the Sacred Heart Church, and of course the square has the Freedom Trail running through the middle. So it's a very significant historic place, and we think that a lot of that needs to be reflected into the design and appreciated through the design approach. It also gets a lot of pedestrians, not just because of the Freedom Trail, but also for the Paul Revere House. In September 20th, Saturday morning from 10 to 6, we did pedestrian counts, and we counted about 6,500 pedestrians coming in and out of the square, which is considerable. From all our number of visits out there, we've always seen a lot of pedestrians milling about, whether it's a weekday, early morning, late afternoon, weekend, or even evenings. The Paul Revere House, in our discussions with them, told us they get 250,000 visitors a year. So it really is a place that has a lot of activity, and it really is partly drawn by the historic Paul Revere House. Circulation, understanding how people in cars navigate in and out, in addition to pedestrians. You can see there's really only one place into North Square, up North Street, and all the roadways from North Square sort of lead out, except for North Street coming into it. It's significant in considering how motorists and deliveries and all the vehicles get in and out of the square as well. And looking at vehicular circulation, we've done a study of taking the turning movements at the intersections, and we've done average daily traffic counts. And one of the things that we found that was interesting is that the traffic counts confirm the turning movements with one exception, within the range of what we'd expect. We found that given the volume of traffic and the percentage of turns that happen from what I'll call North Square East onto Sun Court, it's a higher percentage. And one of the things that we wanted to know was why that was. In our meeting with the folks at the school they said that's the primary route for parents dropping students off. They have 2 buses that come in. They take in about 25 students, and the rest of the students are dropped off by their parents. Many of them park here and walk them down and then exit the square down Sun Court. Parking on the square, in the square itself, we have parking restricted, and this is only parking between, restricted from 6 in the morning to, no, thank you, 8 to 6. We actually had it 4 at an early slide to correct it. And then the rest of the parking out there is by pass. It's a permit, resident permit pass. I'll let some of the people get settled. One of the other important considerations is all the deliveries and some of the functions that take place in the square. You have a lot of restaurant deliveries that take place. You have working going on that people park on the curb. There is the school, as I mentioned, the 2 buses and the parent drop-off. You have a Sacred Heart Church, which has masses and funerals. And all of those different elements have a way of impacting the square and need to be considered as part of what we need to think about as we're moving the design process forward. But one of the things that's important is to get your experience in the square as well. So whether it's as a pedestrian or as a motorist, as a resident, like parking, not parking, we have recognized that when the church has something going on, this area is filled up with parking as well, be that a funeral or a mass. And then there's a lot of people who walk to the church as well. Utilities, all this stuff is underground. It really is something that is sort of the boring side of things, but something we need to consider when we're making proposed changes to the square. A lot of that utilities includes a major gas trunk line in there, a major water line, drainage. There are no drain inlets within the square itself. The first drain inlet is down at this location, so that's an important consideration as we're moving the design forward. Areaways, basically those parts of the basements of buildings that go under the sidewalks, are something that's an important consideration as well. In developing plans, one of the things we want to make sure is we have a complete document. Oh, not a problem. A complete document that limits the surprises for the contractor. Any surprises with the contractor usually means additional money. So what we've done is we've been able to go into the Pierce Courthouse, Paul Revere House, and there's a little areaway here. We've been into the Mariner House, and there's an areaway that basically runs for their full frontage, and it comes out, this is the front base of the Mariner House, it comes out to just about the line of the Freedom Trail. So that's something that we need to pay close attention to as well. We've just recently today been into the church as well as the rectory, and there are some concerns with areaways in the rectory. There is you probably have seen it, a set of stairs that go down from the sidewalk towards the building. We've yet to go into that building, but we've pretty much been into every building except for the one that is in that photograph, and these 2 buildings here. All the other buildings we've been into the basements and looked at them. And one of the things that was really interesting, it gave us a chance to talk to the people that are either the person from the head of Paul Revere House, the people at the Mariner House, and get a really good understanding from their perspective as somebody on the square, what kinds of concerns they have, how their uses go, and that's really going to be something that will inform the design as we move forward. In looking at moving the design forward, and as we gain your input and start to actually develop design ideas, there's a number of guiding principles that we're going to pay close attention to. The first is livability. Those things really have a lot to do with dealing with the historic context and giving a certain respect for that, reinforcing the square as a public space, letting the space be defined by the surrounding buildings. You know, the square, the shape of the square, the triangle, has got currently the chains that reinforce that sort of public zone from the roadway zones, and then you have the sidewalk zone. And we think we would be really remiss if we didn't take cues from the structure that the building faces create to really define that space. Have improvements be balanced for all users, and that's one of the things that we want to know. We can observe what the users are, but if you can give us input as we move forward through tonight, that'd be great. providing new ornamental lights, adding benches and tables out in the square. There's some that are out there now, and from our observations, we see them well used. And the concept of them being able to be movable seems to be working as well. And then looking at parking, one of the sensitivities is a possibility of changing or not changing parking. We'd like to move forward with the idea of not changing parking, but we're in the early stages of the design, so nothing is cast in stone. Walkable, improved accessibility. As I mentioned, the cobbles and such out here makes it very difficult to be a non-able-bodied person to navigate that, or somebody who's pushing a carriage or a stroller or the like. The chain that goes all the way around the public space, let's call it the triangular internal space, really makes it difficult for somebody who isn't an able-bodied to get in there. So you have to carry a wheelchair over or a stroller over. We'd like to look into the possibility of widening the sidewalk by the Paul Revere House side. It's very narrow in some places. Thinking about the side, what I'll call North Square East, the side over by the church, and whether or not we can make that sidewalk, the roadway, into the square flush, so it reads as one contiguous space as opposed to having a curb line break it up. Maybe even try to understate that as a major route that people use from a vehicular standpoint, and maybe have that become able to support that vehicular traffic, but not play it up as a significant vehicular route. And then, of course, ADA compliance. Multimodal as a guiding principle, I mean, this really comes into trying to accommodate all the various uses that currently happen out there and be able to encourage or not discourage additional uses. I mean, you see a lot of people pushing carts because they'll park out on Hanover for some deliveries, or they'll park at one spot in the square and go to many locations. Again, all the different vehicles that come in, we want to make sure that we're accommodating the visitors to the Paul Revere House, patrons of all the restaurants and shops, making sure we accommodate the school, the drop-off, the students, the staff, the parents, making sure we are accommodating Sacred Heart Church and everything that happens there. Make sure that the Mariner House is something that use gets respected, and of course the deliveries, the residents is really important. People who live there on a regular basis, and I'm hoping that some of you can tell us more about your experience on the square. Really, that's something that is going to be forefront in the approach to the design. Being green to the greatest degree possible and understanding that this is an urban setting. One of the things that we're looking at is trying to reduce impervious areas. We'd like to be looking at plantings in a similar way to what's being out there today. Basically, the plantings that you see are maintained by the Parks Department, and we'd want to, to some degree, have at least that much area of green space that can be maintained for aesthetic parts of the enhancements of the square as part of the overall design. And to the greatest degree possible, be sustainable. Sustainable means a lot of different things, and there are limitations to what you can do in an urban environment, and a small urban environment that's very tight with a lot of utilities is even more challenging. And so we're going to be looking into providing green stormwater solutions, looking into improvements and enhancements that are very simple and easy to maintain, utilize durable materials that have a proven record of success, and looking at, again, improving the storm drainage in North Square and trying to find ways to make that as green as possible. So one of the things you've seen in the handouts and you see up here, one of to really get things going is to be able to put out some concepts out there and really be able to start people thinking about what it could be. There has been no design decisions to say this is a design that we're moving forward. We're just saying we've taken a first pass at it, and there's some opportunities that we see on how the design could unfold. But as I said, this meeting is really about getting your input, and that input is going to shape the design. Much like on the traffic counts that we've done, meeting with the people that we've met with, going in to see the vaults, doing the pedestrian counts, that's just one leg of our understanding of how the square operates and understanding its character. The next leg of that really will help lead us to a design solution is hearing from you. And so with that, I would open it up to questions, comments, discussions, and we'll take notes. The other thing that I think is important to point out, there is a comment sheet over there. So if you're a little on the bashful side and don't necessarily want to stand up and make a comment, we encourage you to take one of those and send it in. We're going to assemble all the comments from tonight, anything else that we receive in the mail, and then that will be the springboard to moving forward and really getting into developing design concepts. So with that, I turn it to you guys.
To whom and where should the comments be addressed?
So if you grab a sheet, do you have a sheet? We'll get you one. So you can hand it to us in the presentation here tonight, or you can mail it in. And if everybody can make sure they sign in on the way out, grab their email address, keep you up to date on the future public meetings.
Sir.
What's your idea? What are you going to do with the chain?
Well, the chain I think is a concern. I think one of the things that we'd look at is an idea that takes the chain out. An idea that makes breaks in the chain will be another concept that I think we'd be developing. But I think it's problematic that it basically circles the entire inner part of the square and makes it difficult for everybody to access that. So I think we'd want to look at a number of different options on how that would be handled.
Let me give you a historic history about it. That come out of the Constitution. The bollards come out of the Constitution. So historic-wise,
Can you speak up just a little bit?
yeah, that chain and the bollards come out of the Constitution.
And we've understood from some of the people that it was installed out there in the mid-70s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So historic-wise, I like to see it there. If nothing else, an opening somewhere.
Right.
But I just walked by the park just now, and there's some Spanish girl in short shorts with a no top on, and she's doing a Spanish dance up there, and they're filming it. So I don't know what those tables are used for, but not for that.
I'm not sure what that has to do with the chain, but I like the input.
If I may, and that chain has some significance being in front of the Mariners' house, which has been there a very long time. Part of the historic square.
Like I said, I think we want to develop options that look at a number of different ways that can be incorporated, and one of those options might be that it's not there. I think that, you know, one of the things that we're trying to solve is making sure people can be able to get into the square. All people can get into the square. I'm going to take this gentleman and go to April.
Again, about the chains, I think the only good thing about the chains, it's bad for pedestrians, but it keeps cars from, you know, it's been a barrier to keep the cars. The way the drawing looks now, with just that little curve, was to keep cars from pulling up on them.
We would have to look at trying to make sure we can prevent that.
And snow piling up, because before, you know, the plows would have to, the chain is there, so the plows couldn't dump all the snow on the...
Right.
It'd be like elsewhere in the city where we have a 6-inch or so reveal.
Yeah, but that's nothing for the cars nowadays. Cars and trucks, they'll still, it'll become a parking lot if they don't enforce it. Potentials.
I'm sorry if I came in a little late, I may have missed this, but why are you doing this in the first place? That's what's not, that part is not clear to me at all, why this is being done.
Mostly is for accessibility. Right now the square doesn't meet ADA guidelines. The cobbles in the middle, the chain going around. It's difficult for an able-bodied person, let alone somebody who needs some assistance.
Is this the way it is now?
This?
Is this a perspective or?
That's a picture of a potential design.
Potential. It's
Yes.
not the way it is now.
No, right now it's cobbles all the way to the road. And I think it might be hard to see now with the lights on, but that's existing right now.
You mentioned widening the sidewalk down by the public house. That's the narrowest part to get into the square. So how would you widen that sidewalk?
There's a little space. We might make the roadway a little bit narrower to give some more room to the pedestrians.
As it is, like I said, that's the narrowest part to get up into that area.
And it's a part that you're not supposed to park, so maybe we could take that area that people still park in and turn it over to sidewalks. But we'll be looking at alternatives to widen that area and try to maintain, you know, circulation from vehicle standpoints into the that little narrow spot.
And years ago, we used to be able to make the turn and come through in front of Mama Maria's and the Palermo building. We used to be able to turn around and open, so the middle part of the square was there. And that because you get the parking back up from the cars when they go up the streets for the valet parking and things
Right.
like that. And but they just park in the middle of the street, and you may want to consider if you make that, they could turn in here, or someone could turn.
Turn like this?
Be off in front of this building here,
Right.
because they just pile up right in here. Usually.
Did you already discuss the appropriation and the cost of this project?
No, we haven't discussed that. There's a budget number that the city has for the project.
Did you disclose that?
$2 million.
North Square is one of the oldest squares in Boston.
The country.
In the country, right? Why do you want to make it modern?
Well, I don't think we're trying to make it modern, but I do think that there are some things, because of accessibility laws, that would cause us to have to do things that are...
Take the historical out of Boston, right? Make it modern.
Right.
And give me an example of what is a concern. Like the taking the chain out.
Oh, you taking anything out. Leave the cobblestones, just straighten them out.
That'd be one idea. That'd be one idea that we'd be investigating. Those cobbles were probably put in the early 70s or so.
I was in the 6th grade.
You were in the 6th grade?
Yeah, so it was probably 50 years ago. I lost my diamond ring. I remember.
Because, I mean, we've seen some photographs of a more traditional cobble that you'd expect at near a port, which are the rounded cobbles that would have been ballast stone in the ships. So when the ships came over, they were empty, they'd put those cobbles, the stone in, they'd fill up, they'd take the cobbles out, they'd fill up with goods and then take off, and then they'd use those a lot. You see that often. So we see some photographs, I've seen some photographs of that kind of cobble out there. Mm.
The couple, they were put in the system, and so were the gas lines. And there used to be electric lights up there and packed up with train. And this makes it look a lot more historic, but now over the years they've all sunk in. To show a rendition of some cobblestone stuff.
An idea of what it possibly could be. I mean, really what we're showing is very preliminary ideas, and we're really, obviously the red indicates that's a possibility of brick, but when it comes to actually selecting materials, we haven't even started to do that.
Well, what about gas lines? Would they stay, or?
We would coordinate with the city on that, but I think it would be likely that they would stay. Yeah, maybe updated, newer ones, but that's still yet to be determined. I'm gonna go here, here, there, and there, and if I forget, hopefully you can work with me on that.
A question about, some people mentioned modern, and I think it does look like, in my estimation, I'm not an architect, but I think it looks very contemporary, and it doesn't make a smooth transition to our old buildings, our Sacred Heart Church, our Paul Revere House. It's jolting. It's jolting. And I'm a long time North End resident, and I really don't appreciate the contemporary look to it.
And like I said, we're just getting into the design, so having those kind of comments are important. So I did over here and then over there. Was that how it went? Not you. You're sneaking in. Over there.
I'd like to follow up on what Pidge is saying and some of the other commenters, especially about the historic character and specifically the chain. The chain came from Old Ironside. She was built in this neighborhood, roughly where the Coast Guard station is now. She's right across in Charlestown, and we can hear her cannon fired twice a day. She comes past the North End when she's taken out on her turnaround cruises. And when she came back from her defeat of the Guerriere in 1812, she docked at Long Wharf, and all the populace came out to greet the crew as they came off. So she's a very integral part of the history of this area. And I don't see why the options have to be between keeping the chain and completely moving it, or keeping it in its current configuration. Can't we be creative and do something else with it there in the square?
No, I said part of one of those options could be using parts of it. Yet to be determined, but we're going to develop a bunch of different options and evaluate them, and then be able to have some discussions with you about the options.
You were talking about art.
Yeah.
Could an artist do something with that chain to keep it there in this place?
I have an idea for that, but that might be a little strange. But all right, over there, and then you, and then.
I think it's great that the city wants to do something to help, change things around. But as everybody is saying here, it's the history and the culture and the ambience of the North End. For so many years, it's like they're saying about the chain, which I find very interesting. I didn't know about that. And that area of the park, it's important that it stays the same. The cobblestones, if they need to be fixed, put the money into fixing them. If sidewalks can be made bigger without hurting anything else, then do that. But you can't take away from what's been here for so long. It's just an important part of this community.
Can you put guiding principles back up on the screen?
Sure. The circle?
No, the screen entitled.
Okay.
Is it possible to put the schematic design up next to it? And if so, can you tell us how your guiding principles led to this schematic design?
Well, I would have to say that the guiding principles and the schematic design are a work in progress. And so there are some elements that actually are outside the element of that, but we put the, I don't know if we have, I can probably put the plan up to talk about that.
In other words, go down the
Yep.
list.
How about that?
Tell us, given that as a, well, but I don't see the guiding principles. Start with.
Well, I don't have it
start
set up.
with
I don't have it set
principle
there.
number one, and tell us.
Livability.
And tell us, we were thinking about that, and we ended up with this. And go down each one of them, please, and trace.
Like I said, there isn't a direct correlation because we're still, it's a work in progress. But guiding principles for livability included having people be able to get into the park and having 10 benches and tables in there. It talked about lighting, maintaining lighting. And
excuse me, are those people or benches and tables?
They're both. Well, it's hard to read, but you can come up after and maybe it's be a little more apparent. Can we go to the next?
I'll put the PowerPoint up on the website in that handout that you got this coming in.
This will be on the website, because all I have is this.
I'll put the presentation up there.
So in this one, if you, and I understand, maybe we can kill the lights for a second so we can look at it. So opening up the square for multiple uses, what it has is, at least in this rendition, an idea that there should be tables, there should be benches, there should be that kind of activity that people can get in there and use it. We see that happening all the time. Talking about lighting, talking about sustainability, incorporating green solutions. One of the things that we'd be looking at is whether or not the pavers that are in the roadway can be pervious pavers, so we can reduce the amount of stormwater that's going into the sewer system. And looking at, we can go to another guiding principle.
Yes, please.
Which one would you like us to go to?
The one that had more of them listed.
Very
No,
first
no,
one.
the first one.
Well, respecting the cultural and historic context.
Show us how this does that.
Well, it is a square that has materials that include brick and cobblestone. And we're looking at, in that rendition, suggesting brick and cobblestone. That in the way that we view the square, the buildings are really the walls of that room, that space that are there, and that we don't have the chain in that. And one of the reasons why is the chain sort of focuses your attention into the inner triangle and really creates a separation of the space. And we think the space should flow from building face to building face. So in this particular option, the reason why it's not there is we want to hold the feeling of the square, the triangle, but we want to make it work from one wall to the next wall and be open to all people using it.
But principle number one mentions culture and history. Nothing that you've said mentions culture and history, and nothing here mentions or suggests culture and history.
Well, there's granite out there now, cobblestone, and there's the brick that's out there now, which we could continue to use. Quite honestly, from a truly historic standpoint, if we were recreating that, we wouldn't be using either granite or cobble. We might be using the ballast cobble, and we'd probably be trying to create a gravel path by using exposed aggregate concrete. That's one of the options that we may investigate, to be looking at the history. The history isn't just defined by a chain that's wrapping around. It's the way that the square allows it to be simple so that the buildings can become a strong visual element of how the square is perceived as well. So from that standpoint, I said work in progress, but one of the things from a historical standpoint is not to obstruct or hide the history or be able to minimize the interpretation of the history and to encourage people to continue to come into the square. So one of the things that we think is important is make sure that it's easy for people to move around and be able to, and at least in my particular opinion, is to have the walls of that space, the room that's created, be able to be much more of a visual, significantly part of the visual character of the square.
The bollards would seem to interfere with.
Well, even the gas lights potentially would do that as well. I mean, from a historic standpoint,
No,
you know, that.
historic. I mean,
So bollards may not be what we use. It might be artifacts from the chain.
why are they there?
The bollards?
The bollards along.
Victor, what you see is potentially not going to be what the final product is. I understand you're looking at this picture.
But why did it
But
start off this way?
this is the first of many meetings. This is the first of many meetings. This isn't what most likely, this isn't what the square is going, it's not going to look like that schematic. It's not. We're going to preserve the historical.
Trying to get at his
I
thinking that led to that, hoping that my neighbors will send the thinking in a different direction.
I mean, do you not agree that it's not do you agree that it's not handicap accessible right now? It's very challenging for someone who's handicapped to access the Ori itself. Sure. There's a piece of sidewalk right after you get past Restaurant Common that's probably, you can't even fit a wheelchair. Can't fit a wheelchair past it. So we're looking to expand sidewalk. We're gonna preserve the granite. Those granite sidewalks are historic. Yeah, those granite sidewalks are historic, and they're not going to be moved. For full disclosure, I'm Stephen Pascantilli. I work in the mayor's office. I do special projects. I'm also a resident of the neighborhood. My mother grew up on 190 North Street. She grew up in North School. And you know, you can ask these gentlemen, when we had our meeting internally, I was the most critical individual in the room, because it's very important to me, and it's very important, I think, to the neighborhood that we maintain as much of the historical character of the square as we possibly can. Like Louis said, this is one of the oldest squares in the country. You know, it's. I mean, if you read the Boston Times by Stephen Puleo, there's a whole chapter on North Square, Battle of North Square. There was a hotel there before, Hotel Rome. There's plenty of historical features that will remain. I'm gonna vote that we keep the gas lamps, because I love the gas lamps. And when you go throughout the city of Boston, whether you're in Charlestown, whether you're in Beacon Hill, the gas lamps represent your historical district. And I think it's important that we keep those gas lamps. I think it's important that we try to maintain the cobblestone. There's been discussion about eliminating the parking there, to expand the sidewalks. I mean, you go through there in July 4th weekend, there's hundreds of thousands of people traveling and walking through North Square. So we're gonna try as hard as we can to make it handicap accessible, pedestrian friendly, vehicular friendly, and we'll try to maintain as much of the historical characters of the square as we possibly can. You know, I think when I first saw the schematic, I thought the same exact. I'm almost sure I was thinking exactly what you were thinking. It just looks a little. It doesn't look historic, to be honest with you. When you look at that picture, it doesn't look historic. I'll be the first one to admit it. But that's not the final product.
It's also put out there
That's not the final product.
to get input and people's comments on it too.
How did your business get chosen? Was it based upon this?
No.
And how?
Through our relevant experience and projects that we've done in the past and our reputation of what we have done and those types of things. It was a number of people submitted their proposals to the city. Well, no. We didn't develop a proposal that gave an image of North Square that was chosen. We gave a proposal that was our qualifications, the work that we've done in the past, who we are, and a listing of some of those projects that we think would be relevant to this project for the city to consider.
And then you came up with this?
Then we went through, and as we started going through the gathering of information, we started to sketch up a number of different ideas so that we could be able to put things in front of people to get them to react to.
If you're asking us to tell you
Yes.
what to put in there, then you should, when you came up with this, it's not close, as we're all saying. So it's a bit difficult to understand how you're going to do this.
Well, I can tell you that we have the framework of the buildings that you see around there. We started to create the framework so that when we get to the point where we're presenting concepts in the public, we'd have that. That framework isn't complete. We have I don't know, probably a half dozen different concepts that we've sketched up and put together as we've been studying different things, looking at sidewalks, widths, looking at what should be flat, maybe raising the roadway, raising it. We've started to do a lot of different studies. We put this in as a way of presenting an idea that you could react to so we can get feedback on it. So we don't have any set idea at this point on how it should go.
I have a question, and I'm going to roll it back a little bit. Yeah. And that question is, considering a lot of this is about ADA, you also have to remember historically, ADA was not as important in the past years as it is today. So we can't essentially complain about where the square is today because of the development of the city. So I hear the change. Yes, Fort Revere Park, which has ample room to build essentially a ramp for ADA, still has chains. And there is no ramp there, there's steps. So to Joe and Stephen, after we take the chains away from North Square, are you going to remove the chains and steps from Fort Revere Park?
Rachel Revere Park?
Fort Revere Park.
With the horse auto or Rachel Revere?
With a horse statue.
With the horse statue.
I don't have anything
Well,
on my radar right now.
If that were to be a project coming in the future, that would be part of the consideration, having to do whatever needs to be done to make that look.
You're removing the same chain.
Right, and I'm not saying.
It seems important here, so it's not as important over there.
He doesn't have to because there's already a ramp access to the product.
There's a ramp there, but this is talking about the same thing in a sense. Because here,
Well, but
There's
you
no
if I
handicap
look at the
access to
shadow
the North
here,
Square. There's handicap access to the product. That's the difference.
There is, and it's not, because the chains link part of the north end going all the way down to the north end park, where the chains exist along the waterfront. So that chain, pertaining to the history and architectural design, ties in the north end. And I think it's important to a certain extent. From my standpoint, I'm the captain of Mariners House. So, for the full disclosure. So there's things I agree with and things I don't agree with. For the most part, I think what I hear from my neighbors is that if we have a design, a visual design that's being displayed, it's attentive of where the square is going.
Not necessarily.
There's no other thing for them to look at. If you had submitted 5 or 6 other things, they could be picking and choosing.
Well, the real, right, and we're going to, that will be a part of the process, but part of this process is primarily getting as much background to be able to move that forward, and part of being able to do that, I've done a number of meetings, is oftentimes if you don't have something for people to react to, you don't get as much input from them.
Okay.
And so having something for them to react to me, oftentimes gets into some of the real meat and potatoes issues that you need to discuss.
I agree. So on this, on the east side where the Sacred Heart Church is, that seems like it's a different composition. Is that a different elevation of the road?
Could be. One of the things we're considering on what I'll call North Square East by the church is that the grade of the sidewalk, the grade of the road, and the grade of the square area could be this. So this could all be not at, it'll all be the same level. So you'd be able to move without any vertical hindrance.
Yeah.
Like a curb line or the like.
So we're also using then material, like a brick in the middle, to break out the difference of the road and where the square is.
It could be one approach to be doing that, to use a different material to tell people where the road is and be able to, you know, what we'd be looking at is trying to downplay as one concept, downplay that roadway and let that feel more like an open square. But that's just one concept. That might not be, again, when we get to the point where we're looking at a number of concepts, that might not be what we end up with.
Yeah, the only thing I really disagree where it says here multiple urban uses, I only see one use for the square, and that's for people to rest and enjoy it. People aren't going to play ball, or what the kids do from Sacred Heart Church when they rope it off. And that's acceptable to the community, because that's been there for as long as the church and the school has been there. But there's really only one use, and that's for people to sit. And that was by the generosity of the community when they put the cables in. It wasn't the city's idea.
Right.
And it's also, by the way, the people in the neighborhood who pick up after the tourists who were there.
Right.
So all of this, I think, leans to one use for people to rest and relax.
Well, I would just say that in our observations, that certainly is a very primary focus of how that's used. It's also been, I've seen a lot of times it's been used as a place where people give tours, and that's part of the tour. They stop there, they look. I've seen people get out there and have lunch. I've seen people, we heard about the performance that was being filmed out there. I've heard about weddings being photos and from weddings and such. And so I think maybe what you're saying is primarily a pedestrian-focused area. It's not a place that you're going to expect to have a green spot where people are going to play ball or catch a frisbee. But that I'm thinking that from a multiple purpose standpoint, it could also be a place where there'd be a focus of a festival that takes place there as well. So when we're saying multiple uses, we're trying not to preclude any of the current uses that are taking place now, and let it be
stay where they are.
let the space be flexible enough to even have newer uses or new uses that aren't currently being done there now to be incorporated into how the square is, the livelihood of the square.
Okay. All right, I'm taking up enough time.
We're going to come back with more pictures, but tell us more about what it is that we should be thinking about when we draw the pictures.
Just make that old Brooklyn like it's supposed to be.
Okay.
So the idea, I pass through the square virtually every day, and often the square is completely deserted, and it seems to be a failure of the square. It attests to the fact that it's a failure of the square, because that should be the focal point of the north end, or certainly one of the focal points of the north end. The idea of having the grade removed in front of the church is perfect, because that produces a sort of a plaza feel in front of it. And what Mike said is absolutely right. The square should be a place where people gather. Right now, they're gathering there because of the generosity of a couple of people who put some tables out there. That should not be. It should be a place where people can gather, spend some time, and enjoy the north end. Maybe take a sandwich over to it and have something to eat there. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and squares of that nature exist all over Europe. This square could very easily be modeled that way. I know there is traffic that has to go through it to a certain degree, but it needn't be the dominating factor here. It should be pedestrian-oriented, and then secondarily a place where traffic passes through. Mike's observations are absolutely perfect. It should be a gathering place, and it's not right now. We see tourists passing through it, of course. They come through in clusters. And then all of a sudden it's totally deserted because the square is unfriendly to pedestrians. It's completely unfriendly to pedestrians. If I were doing it, I would make it far more pedestrian friendly.
All right, I'm going to go to the gentleman in the back, white.
Thank you. As you guys know, I've studied the problem somewhat, and I applaud the fact that you understand that there is a problem with elevations and differences in levels that have to be dealt with from an accessibility point of view. I'd like to sort of back up a little bit and look at the entire area as sort of a larger gestalt from a design point of view. And I'd like to ask, I've asked before, is it absolutely necessary to exclude Rachel Revere Park as part of the continuum of what the potential, from a design point of view, what the incredible potential of the entire space could be? And, right, and could you assuage me of the fear that if that design question were asked, and you said, yes, from a designer's point of view, it is necessary to make this a continuum if you really want to realize the potential of the square and go back to the city and say, this is going to be more than $2 million, will the city come back and say, well, there's $2 million, spend this anyway, and we end up with something like Bartlett Place, which, you know, depending on what time it is still falling apart in pieces. So, I mean, are we able to step back and ask those questions from that larger perspective?
I'm going to jump into this one. So the square itself here is a public works asset. Rachel Revere Park is a Parks Department asset. The Parks Department put out a request for quote for design work on the park just recently.
On the
We're
park
gonna-
of Rachel there.
Yes, so we're going to work with them to make sure our designs mesh together and be coded as one good looking product.
So we're going to be basically integrating those two spaces, but as two projects. But the design is going to be integrated.
You know what, it's one of the challenges we have in the city. I mean, no matter where you go, Parks owns this lot of land, DPW owns this lot of land, property management owns this. It can be frustrating at times, but it actually is, we finally have a situation where we're gonna be able to work with the Parks, DPW will work with the Parks Department to do something collaboratively, and it's, Joe sat down with Parks the other day, and, they're on deck, and they're going to work in conjunction with these folks. But it is frustrating, sometimes you just wanna put everything all in one bowl, but, like Joe said, that's a Parks Department asset, and the Square is the responsibility of the Department of Public Works. Can I just say one thing about Bartlett Place? You're absolutely correct. We could have done a whole lot. And Bartlett Place was something that was done a couple of years ago. We sat in this very room and had the same discussion. We had plans that were a lot more, I thought were a lot more creative than what is there now, and we got a lot of pushback from the neighborhood. And we're speaking about benches and having it be a gathering place, which I absolutely think we should do. We wanted to do the same thing in Bartlett Place, and the abutters in the area were absolutely adamant to keep it as simple as possible. So I agree with you, Sandra. It should have been something a little more creative than what we have there now. We got 4 bike racks and 2 planters. It's not very. I don't think it's very.
It's the quality of the materials.
No, I understand.
Asphalt and it's failing.
We were going to do a lot more there.
Brick.
There was a meeting here. We were going to put. We were going to make it like a mini. Really a mini piazza with some benches and some. We're going to put a tree there as well. And we didn't get the feedback we anticipated.
So there is a plan to fix Rachel with
Can I talk for a second? I'm Allison Perlman. I work with the Boston Parks, and Rachel Revere is my project. There's a plan, we've been planning for the last year that this Rachel Revere would come online as a renovation, and we were delighted to find out that North Square was also going to be renovated at the same time, and so I think we're looking at this as a huge opportunity for us to work with our designer, to work with their designer, and come up with kind of a collective design idea, and so it's a little more coordinated and feels like they're a part of one thing instead of separate.
And to that point, I mean, if you spend a little time out there, and I've spent far less than most all of you, I mean, you see that they're not separate on how they're used. And you see that people will come up the Freedom Trail, they'll gather into Rachel Revere, they'll come across to the square, they'll go over to the Revere House, they'll trickle into the center portion of the square. I mean, and you see the kids from the school, they'll do playground activities, much like the few benches around here. You'll see some people on a sunny day over there eating. I mean, this whole thing really, it works together now. It doesn't speak to each other now in the way it looks and feels, but it seems to be, from a pedestrian standpoint, people flow in and out of those spaces, and anything that can be done to encourage that, I think that'd be very important. All right, I'm going to go to some different people. I've picked you before, but you, and then you way in the back, and I'll come back to you. Oh, and I didn't see you, so you're going to have to be on the tail end of that.
I have a very simple question, and I know this is a preliminary rendering, but would you be putting more trees in? Would that be a plan since it is a park?
It's possible. I mean, one of the balancing acts when I think about trees in this area, I really, the architecture of the buildings really, to me, are a major component of the framework, but certainly shade and making it comfortable for people there. So finding the right location, the right scenario, how trees would work, I think would be a challenge. But yeah, I think having trees in there would be important.
I mean, there are 4 there now. I know they're not being shown in the rendering, but they were just put in recently.
Yeah.
So I would hope that at least be checked.
Yeah. I just heard someone say that because they keep on dying. One of the things that we would look at.
They've been dying. I mean, every time they put trees in all the time, they always die.
Well, one of the things that we look at is if we're going to put trees in, is really creating the best environment below grade for them to grow and thrive in. So that's going to be part of what we would look at as well. Next.
I have 2 questions. Did you think about a water station there, and also selling the benches of some areas, namely grade one?
Yes and no. Yes, the idea of the water features come up. It's a maintenance issue. I think the way the city would look at it is if there was a group and organization that banded together to commit to maintaining that in perpetuity, they'd probably find that to be an acceptable idea. The bench, the naming part, that could be something that could be supplemental to the reconstruction as a way of giving more funds for different types of things. And one of the things that can take place is people have a sense of ownership if they purchase a bench. I've worked on other projects where the lighting in a town common, the businesses that surrounded the common purchased the lights. And they got a little plaque in a certain place and were recognized for that. And today, the people are very possessive about making sure that their light is in good condition and everything's taken care of. So that's a possibility, not something that we've discussed yet, but we can discuss it. Okay, I'm going to go over here, there, and there.
The potential removal of the cobblestones from the areas that the cars travel in may create even more problems. I don't agree that there should be vehicular access free-flowing all the time. There should be for funerals and weddings for the children coming through to be picked up and dropped off. But right now, the cobblestones, at least where the cars move, serve as a traffic calming. It prevents the valet parkers, taxi cabs, and shortcutters from speeding up through that square. And as you have already pointed out, there are children playing in Rachel Revere Park. There are tourists and groups that are so large that spill over onto the cobblestones. And so they are protected because it is difficult. You really have to slow down when you get into the square. So it is fraught with peril. I think if you were just to think in terms of smoothing all of them out. I understand about handicap accessibility, but right now it does serve as a traffic calming device. And visually, I notice when I come on Little Prince Street or I round the corner at Richmond, people are astounded when they first behold North Square, because it brings them back if they ever went to Europe or if they ever imagined going to Europe. And it really is iconic, and it works on all of us in subliminal ways. And I would hate to think that the character of it would change so much that it makes it easier for the valet parkers, taxi cabs, and the people who pass through it, because you'll be inadvertently increasing traffic instead of trying to calm it.
All right, who's next? I think I said you and then, oh no, I'm sorry, you're right, thank you.
Somebody over there, but I'll go. Remind me, does this involve any work on utilities? Because the concern is with the number of utilities that are in the square woven, many of them quite old, that the minute you finish this project, someone is going to need to tear up or put in a new something.
So we know water and sewer has to go through and do some water work. They'll get in ahead of us. What we do is we'll reach out to the utilities, let them know that we're planning on reconstructing the square. And we have called Guaranteed Street, where we don't allow cuts into the street other than for emergency purposes for 5 years after that.
So we will be coordinating with them so that it's on their radar. And if they have something in their, say, 5-year plan that might be on the latter side of that, then we'd be encouraging them to try to take care of it sooner rather than later.
Water and sewer is going in and digging it.
No.
Not this spring.
But they're going ahead of us.
We don't have timing yet. I'm going to go here and then I'll come back to you, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
Follow up, because water was done. We had new lines run, I'm going to say 10 years ago in North Square, because we put them in the Revere House and the H1 House. So that's been done. The sewer is surprisingly horrible. So
yeah,
that really does need, I mean, there are sewer lines that just sort of drop into nowhere. The other question I have is, in the best of all possible worlds, what is your time frame for this project?
It's going to depend on when the other utilities get in ahead of us. Water and sewer is not planning on being able to get out there this winter. I'm not sure how excited I am to have them out here in the middle of summer next year with all the pedestrians. There's not necessarily a great time to work in somewhere like this, but we're looking at early 2016 is when when I anticipate starting.
To start the, no,
This project, yeah.
As of now, that can change.
Yeah, right, yeah, change, based on the coordination that we do.
Hi. I walked in late because I had another commitment, but I was wondering what the discussion was going to be like. Because this is well, I just was wondering. And when I came in, I just wanted to let everyone know, we could well have been having a discussion about Ball Square in Somerville or Inman Square. And I just wanted to remind everyone that this is North Square. And this is one of the most historical squares in the country. And I don't hear anything about that coming over. I mean, just as it will be inappropriate to put vinyl siding on the Jefferson Memorial, I think it's wholly inappropriate to put a design that looks like it would be more comfortable in Reno, Nevada, this design, into historic North Square. And I wanted to ask, how are you treating this area especially? Because I don't see anything. It seems as if this is just another DPW, let's improve the intersection and maybe get trucks involved. It seems like it should be a lot bigger, a lot more thoughtful, huge involvement with the National Park Service, and it just seems like it's Inman Square.
Well, we've already done a preliminary archaeological historic study where our sub-consultant has gone through and given us a lot of historic background. And what we will, as we move through the process, there'll be a sounding board for talking through some of the options. But I mean, you know, one of the things is we're still in the early stages of it. So, as I've said a number of times, the whole idea of putting something out there really is to elicit comments and be able to say. So then, what I would do now, for wanting to understand what people think, is what would be a suggestion from a design standpoint that you would think would be compatible with the historic nature of it all.
Well, I mean, you know, I will defer to the designers, but I will say, if you are looking to elicit a response, a positive one from the neighborhood and from the historical societies that are around the neighborhood, I would be very careful to put what seems to be a very generic design out as the first thing that you show, because it just gives the flavor that, you know, maybe this is going to be a project treated very generically. I mean, I would like to see a process that includes a lot of historical input, gets the folks at the Paul Revere House integrally involved, National Park Service represented on an equal footing. I find it odd that sort of we're talking about the administrative split between DPW and Parks Department. I think that disserves us. I would actually think about how to administratively put this project together into a more holistic entity that could be treated more cohesively. Because right now, number one, I think that there is very little emphasis on the history of the square being shown in the design. And I'm worried that the process, as we're talking about it, which would be a routine process for any other square in Boston, is identical. And I think we need a special process here.
Well, and I can tell you that we will be coordinating with all the historic folks. We've already had a meeting with the folks at the Paul Revere House, started the conversations. Again, I think putting forth, well, from a design concept, I do think that the approach wants to be more on the simple side. And what I mean by that is not underwhelming, but not really having the square and everything that's in the middle of the square become some sort of focal point, whereas the square should almost be the platform on which you experience your surroundings, is part of where I would be going with that. That's one. The second thing is, from looking at a very first image to get input from people on, if there was a lot of things going on in the square, I feel as though we might get sidetracked. I'd rather have something simple on the first one for people's input, as opposed to that, because we are going to have options that we're going to be presenting, and we're going to have discussions about it. This is really meant to, just as important as having the historic discussions, it's really important to us to make sure we get a sense of the neighborhood, the people who live and work here, on equal footing with all of those different discussions. And this is what this meeting is all about.
Well, the question I have, I mean, I missed some of the stuff at the beginning, so pardon me if I'm going over ground you already covered, but I mean, is there a landscape architect who has done historical work before that you guys have engaged that is, you know, fully integrated into the project at this point?
Yes.
Okay, who is that?
Me.
Okay. well, okay, you've given your credentials, so I
Are
don't
you
want to ask you
ASLA?
to repeat
Yep.
them.
Well, I mean, I've worked on a lot of historic projects. I just am finishing up, being constructed now, a project in Wellesley, Fullerbrook Park. I mean, it's a very different project than this, but a lot of the approach that you take and looking at the background and understanding the context of the situation or the environment and use that to help inform how you would bring a design solution along is similar. Worked in a number of historic downtowns and had to do the same thing up in Reading, Massachusetts, where there was a very significant town common that's there into 4 pieces, and we really had to fit modern traffic through that, and in a way that wasn't compromising it. So there was a lot of work done in that with that respect as well. So, but we also have a historic firm on board that's going to be helpful in making sure contextually that we pay attention to decisions on materials, the layout of things, making sure we look at if there's artifacts that need to or should be incorporated or not be incorporated, give comments on the historical nature of whether or not that's appropriate. So they're on board for doing that as well.
I would say, I grew up in the Merrimack Valley. Reading is a beautiful town. Wellesley has beautiful neighborhoods. They are not the place where Paul Revere, decided to get up one morning and maybe take a stroll over to start the American Revolution.
And every project has its own unique characteristics, and that's part of why we're here.
But we're not ignoring the historical characteristics or the historical.
So we're not elevating it either.
Well, we haven't gotten to that point yet.
And to try to have some.
Well, some people may not want to elevate it too much.
Well, to have an equivalency to some comment in New England.
I'm not saying this. Well, no. Excuse me. I'm not saying this is equivalent to some comment. You were asking about some experience, and I was just trying to let you know that I have worked on it. We're working in, excuse me, Lexington downtown and the Lexington Battle Green. You could say Lexington Battle Green, Reading Town Common, same thing, same approach. But you have to really delve into the details of the historic nature and get an understanding and let that inform the design. And each and every one is going to end up being unique in its own way if you do that process.
I don't mean to be confrontational. I mean, some of my apparent confrontation is colored by the submission of this design, which I think was a big mistake on your part, because it doesn't capture anything that is germane to Square.
It has been the focal point of a lot of discussion and input. So for me, it's been successful in that way.
Okay, then I'm really concerned.
My whole concern is success. I didn't say that this is.
This is the neighborhood. What other interests? Where would you want to get your input? This is the place you should get your
That's why we're here.
You said other inputs. You had a lot of other inputs. What other? This is the first place we ever.
Well,
it's not going to be the last either. We're going to be
Yeah, by the time we get to the next meeting.
We went into the basement of the Mariner House. We had a discussion with Mike of some of the concerns that he might have. We met with the folks at the Paul Revere House, went into their basement, talked about their ongoing expansions and what they're doing, and how the elements of the project could help to serve their needs. We've talked to some of the restaurants along there, and we've got some input from them. I forget the name of the shop that's right next to Paul Revere House.
You're talking to the restaurant, you're talking to the shop. You got to talk to the people who live there.
Right. That's what we're here.
Well, everything you're saying is who you talk to. You've been talking to restaurants and different stores and stuff. You didn't say you talked to a certain resident person and tell you the thing. I'll tell you right up front, I don't like the cobblestones. I never did either because I'm afraid. I won't walk on them. I always go to the sidewalk. I agree with, what's his name, Stephen there, but the little section of when you're coming off by the Paul Revere's house, why can't you just fix it? Fix the other thing, make the park a little bit nicer, keep the historic stuff, fix some of the cobblestones. I don't even mind if you take it off this side, because like someone else said there, I drive up there every time I go to the airport, every time I go shopping, because I gotta bring my food and carry it down my street, and go down my street.
And run over half the
when I come to the
floors and everything else.
cobblestones, I do exactly what that person said. I know exactly that's it, because I can worry about my car too. And I go very slowly. And I do wait for the tourists, because I'm a traveler myself, so I know how it feels if I'm sightseeing and everything. So I'm very careful. These are the people you got to talk to. And then again, if you want to make it like a park, I know some people don't like that, don't like that I'm going to say this, but I live there. And I have the people that might come from the restaurants at 2:30, and they'll be in that park dancing, singing, and running down the street like they do now. So you're only going to make it a park for those kids, not for the tourists, Because the tourists aren't gonna stay. It's gonna be for all the college kids, all the people that just wanna hang out at night. That's what that park's gonna turn out to be. Thank God I'm not gonna be here much longer, but that's what the park's gonna be.
I have a hunch you'll be around to experience whatever. But this is that's the kind of conversation that we're looking for. It's important feedback. We've only been really working on this since August, and we haven't really. We've done some of the preliminary investigations. We've got the survey. This is, I'll say it again. This is a very important part of setting the context for us on how to move the design forward. I'll go here and there and maybe over there. It's a good question.
The neighborhood has already had some unsuccessful experience with an area that was flattened and combined traffic and pedestrians. And I'm talking about the lunar experiment in front of the old Martinetti buildings on Cross Street. Now, when we were in public discussions for that, the residents raised concerns about mixing traffic into something that looks like it's for pedestrians, especially since we have 250, 300,000 visitors a year who aren't going to be familiar with the area. And sure enough, after it was opened up, there were lots of near misses, including a city councilor who came out with some residents to talk about it and almost got hit by a car himself coming through there. So they shut down part of it to vehicular traffic. I'm concerned you could have the same situation here. The other bad experience, frankly, is the work that was done on our sidewalks a year or so ago to put in the dimpled ramps for ADA accessibility.
Right, tactile warning.
Done terribly. Instead of cutting the sidewalk down and sloping it, we've got lumps of macadam piled up on the corner. And do they have to be yellow? I mean, I know we're not Beacon Hill, but it's kind of jarring, so I don't find that that project respected the residents or the character of this area. So those are just some concerns that I hope would go into the design.
Sir.
Yep. Okay. This evening, what I've been hearing from a lot of people is concern about the pedestrians. And I'm all for ADA and so forth, but if you start to level off the areas to make it, you know, you're talking about raising certain areas like she was just concerned about. My concern is that a lot of the tourists now are using the bicycles. And if you start to level that off, and if you don't design something, you'll have pedestrians trying to enjoy it, and you'll have bicycles roaring through it. So when you're doing your design, think about trying to protect the pedestrians, because nowadays the North End, there's a lot more people using bicycles than there ever used to be.
Okay. Over there, then over there.
I'm glad that you're going to be working with Allison and eventually Rear Park, at least in harmony, which is good. And Allison has a lot of experience reaching out to the history community because of the work on Liberty Tree Park, which is
We can talk about that later.
another story. But I mean, I think that's very important. But it's equally important to merge the history community, the Mass Historical Commission, the Park Service, us, with the needs of the community. History is being in the community. So I think anything that excludes the voices of the community while you talk to the history community or vice versa isn't really the way to go. I think we need to talk together. So as speaking as someone from the history community who also feels a part of the community, those are equal. The residents who've had to live with our tourists,
right.
You know, it's all part of the way this gets figured out together, because the history of that square is history that's evolved. It might not be right to make it look colonial. It might be right to make it look colonial. It might be right to keep the chain there. All those things have to be discussed together, because the history isn't one moment in time. It's change over time. So I want to make sure that the discussions, we don't have the history people in one corner and the community in another. I think that would be a mistake.
Well, and I was thinking the same, that I think, well, I'm excited that this is going to be a more usable space and friendly space, but the design here just feels too sterile. But I don't feel like you need to mimic the neighborhood to embrace it and complement what's there. But I don't think this embraces the environment around it enough.
There and then there.
I think one of the opposition to your design, I think, is the fact that it's very dramatic. There was a minimalist approach to this square that seemed to work, where it served as a background to the facades of the building. Your design, coming with this triangle of bricks in the center, dominates the square, and it seems to it detracts from the square. It's far too contemporary, far too dramatic for what's going on there. There was another approach to it which was very simple, extremely simple, and it let the square speak for itself, whereas your design is imposing itself into the design of the square. It's just a feeling like that.
Maybe if you put seating and tables in the park area, and then you can leave the chain and then the triangle. You know, maybe you don't have to really access into the chain area.
Okay.
The areas are big, but I don't know, like like the trees and fountain or something, and like don't use stuff that you need. You know, you keep that like a pretty, keep the cobblestones and stuff in that area, and then use the park for pedestrian.
Gathering spaces.
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize, but I'm in that square every day, and I see people all summer long loving the square. They love it the way it is. And I think really what it needs is maintenance. It needs the cobblestones, if you're going to keep them fixed, so people can walk. But they love that beautiful center of flowers. Yes, put a couple of benches, let people sit down. I mean, we don't need the trash of people eating and throwing their trash on the street. We need a traffic flow because we have businesses, and you know the residents have learned to live with the businesses. We need the people to go through their trucks. We need the tourists to go through. We can't make everything narrow or cut on parking spots because the residents need their places to park. But I think what people are trying to say here, and if I'm listening properly, is they love the square the way it looks now, but it needs to be maintained. It's a problem walking. You can't wear shoes. Your shoes get broken. It's a problem for your car because it gets broken underneath. The children, they're out there playing. So the chains are beautiful. Yes, you need an opening in the chain to get into the square. The flowers are beautiful. The brides come from other cities to get married at Sacred Heart Church because it's a beautiful square. People are taking pictures all the time. So I think maintenance is more of what we need than a whole new design. That's only my...
There's also been quite a few films that have been made there or been shot, and how much of they've actually captured the images into the real movie. So this particular design or concept in this era, that will go away. I don't see that being used. To Pam's point about brides having photos and other people using the square photos, I think the historic nature has been essentially sterilized in this particular view. Therefore, the filmmaking industry, on top of, let's say, the recreational point that we discussed prior, won't be there. And that's a business aspect of the square. It's a sense of pride. People in the community. I don't want to speak to all my neighbors, but that's how I think about it. It's a sense of pride.
When you're going back thinking about creative ideas to present to the community the next time around, I'd like to revisit a water feature. And the issue of maintenance, I don't see why that's an issue, because there's a water feature in the Prado, the park where the horses are. And they were putting antifreeze in it yesterday. That seems to be maintained, presumably by the Parks Department.
Who was putting in it?
There was major problems with that years ago. They just actually got that up and running.
Well, it's looking good now.
It looks great now, actually.
Well, whoever is maintaining it, perhaps they could maintain it
You
more.
also might have people in
for
this room.
DPW as
From
well.
what I'm hearing tonight,
I mean,
from what I'm hearing tonight, to be honest with you, listen, it would be great to have Piazza Novagna in the middle of the North End Square. It would be spectacular.
Oh, yes, out on
But
Cross
people-
Street, I agree.
Yes, but people, I think people want to keep it basic, that's what I hear. And I'll be honest with you, I vote for keeping it colonial looking and historic looking. When I walk through the North Square, all I think about is Florrie Fair and the American Revolution and the Old North Church and the Freedom Trail. That's me. Some people may remember the maypole when they were kids doing, you know, all that stuff, and Holy Communion and Sacred Heart Church. That's before my time. I think colonial, I think gas lamps, I think the Bunker Hill Monument, I think the Constitution, those are the things that run through my mind when I walk through, and it's quaint, it's historic. Tom used a perfect word, it's iconic. I love North Square. I want to keep cobblestones, and you know, it's a good discussion. I know a lot of people have different opinions on what we should and should not do. You know, I know some people don't want benches, and I can't blame people who live in the general area that don't want benches. I know some people want to have benches, so it's a place for people to gather, but water feature, you know.
Okay, if you put the water feature in a piazza on Cross Street, I would
love to. That's Max Dodd's property.
More comments, questions? More pitches, more ideas based on this and other input.
Start the next meeting at 6:30 instead of 6 o'clock. Make it easier to see what's
That's why I was late. I thought it was 6:30.
We don't have one scheduled yet. I'll ask, please make sure everybody signs in here. I'll send out an email when we have that scheduled. We'll have Nicole. You'll let us know. Still here. But we'll have her send out the last one. And that website that's on the handout.